This presentation was originally prepared for the Production Essentials Summit of GDC 20, Cultural Intelligence for the Games Industry by Tina Mary. Due to the deferment of the conference, this content was delivered as a webinar on Thursday, March 26th. The following is a curated copy of the content. Thank you for joining me to learn more about cultural intelligence for the games industry. My name is Tina Mary and I've been working in games since 2003. I've traveled extensively since that time and lived in 4 different countries while shipping 25 AAA titles. I've worked with some incredibly talented teams in franchises including Marvel, FIFA, Need for Speed, and Candy Crush. In my work with global teams, I've noted consistently that culture really does matter. The teams and I have had many interesting conversations about how culture shows up in the workplace and affects our collaborations. In early 2018, I was very excited to learn about the Cultural Intelligence, or the CQ framework, and understand its potential to help us build amazing games. As would seem appropriate in a webinar about cultural intelligence, we have attendees joining us from all over the world. Let's take a quick poll to see where we all hail from. In today's presentation, we'll be covering 3 different topics. The first topic will be to clearly define what is cultural intelligence and the related capabilities, how do we measure it, and what's the relationship to the business of making games. The second topic we'll be exploring is cultural values. What are they and how do they help you understand more about yourself and the world around you? The final topic will be about developing your cultural intelligence. I promise you that you will come away with some tangible insights into how you can improve cultural intelligence in yourself and your team. Today's presentation will not only help you understand the definition of cultural intelligence, but also bring together the relevance of CQ in terms of the gaming industry and the practical implications that it offers for you. In games development, innovation is critical to all areas of our business. We've also been consistently told that more diversity in our talent pool is not only the right thing to do, but will also lead to the outcome of more innovation. However, without high CQ, or cultural intelligence, this may not hold true according to extensive research and studies. Let's look at the results of 2 similar teams with comparable technical ability. The homogeneous team will likely outperform the diverse team if they are both low in cultural intelligence. However, once we introduce the quotient of high CQ, the diverse team starts to realize its benefits. They see up to 3 times the number of innovative solutions and improved effectiveness. And this is because diverse teams with high CQ are better equipped to create a place of safety and inclusion, which allows innovation to flourish. Okay, so here we have our formal definition. Cultural intelligence, or CQ, is the capability to function and relate effectively in culturally diverse situations. But what do we mean by culturally diverse? What do we mean, in fact, by culture? As we explore the concept of cultural diversity and cultural intelligence, it's a good idea perhaps to step back and define the actual word culture. Geert Hofstede, who was a Dutch psychologist that specialized in intercultural studies, stated that culture is a shared pattern of beliefs, values, assumptions, and behaviors that differentiate one group of people from another. In a way, Hofstede was telling us that culture really means what is accepted and familiar can change from one different group or environment to another. We tend to think about culture in the common context of nationality. Where in the world are we from, or where are our parents from? What ethnicity are we? What religion are we? And so on. We can also think about culture in the concept of the family unit. What is accepted and familiar, and the rules that can change from one family to another, from one generation to the other. Think about the millennial versus Gen X versus baby boomers. The rules of what is accepted and familiar shift. The rules at your friend's house when you were growing up were different than at home. If we go to the school, we think about the difference in the culture between the classroom and the playground. Even in a classroom, the culture in the mathematics class was probably different than the culture in your art class. What was accepted and familiar in terms of behaviors was different. And of course, then that brings us to the workplace. At Electronic Arts, we had a variety of different organizational cultures. We had the global culture of EA. We had the studio cultures, EA Vancouver, EA Romania, EA Redwood Shores. In EA Vancouver, we had the different cultures of the different studio groups, the central art teams, the game franchises, FIFA versus NHL. Even within the franchises, we had FIFA Next Gen versus Current Gen versus handheld teams. You saw within the game teams the disciplines collaborating and grouping together, producers versus artists versus engineers. So in all those cases, what we can do is think about culture perhaps as the way we do things around here, wherever here might be. So we can now understand that cultural intelligence, or CQ, helps us relate to others who are culturally different than ourselves. What benefits do we realize from that knowledge? The production benefits of developing CQ in yourself and your teams are clear. We can see increased profits and reduced costs as teams understand how to work more effectively and identify improved opportunities. As teams learn to collaborate and work more effectively together, they're going to become happier and more engaged. Cultural intelligence offers us a clear framework to manage bias in the business of making games, for anything from making decisions on hiring to game features. And ultimately, it's clear that cultural intelligence can help us build better games faster. What's in it for you? If you develop cultural intelligence or your CQ skills, you will find it's going to be easier to adapt, whether you're traveling for pleasure, working on a brand new team, taking on a new role, or maybe even being asked to take on an international assignment, you'll find it easier to adapt. You'll be able to better enjoy the diverse experiences that life throws at us. You'll be able to persist when cultural differences come about and things get uncomfortable or awkward. You'll find yourself more personally effective in all aspects of your relationships, and you are going to be a more desirable employee and colleague. We like working with people who are high CQ. They understand us and we relate well to them. As we've now reflected on the definition of cultural intelligence and started to understand its relevance to the business of making games, we should stop and reflect on two very important points. The first point is, yes, cultural intelligence can be measured, as we've talked about. If we look at the CQ capabilities, they can be defined and measured and quantified, and we'll be looking at that next. Using that information, we'll start to understand how the CQ capabilities can be improved and how we can therefore improve our overall cultural intelligence. There are several common myths about cultural intelligence I want to share with you. The first is that individuals who have high emotional intelligence also have high cultural intelligence. That's certainly not necessarily true. High emotional intelligence measures our ability to effectively regulate and manage our own emotions and those of others. However, this is very culturally conditioned. In other words, our ability to detect happiness and sadness in others is reflected in our cultural traditions. Some cultures are very expressive, others are less so. When you think about direct eye contact, in one culture that might reflect confidence, in another it might reflect insubordination. So really cultural intelligence is the next step in evolution beyond emotional intelligence and allows us to work beyond emotional intelligence and allows us to work effectively with others from different cultures. The other is going to bring us cultural intelligence. Again, that's a pretty common myth. If in fact, the reality is that we can travel extensively, but never really go beyond the tourist places and experience local cultures. Even if we go live abroad, if we stay within the expat communities, we can quite easily lack an opportunity to develop our cultural intelligence despite our international experiences. The next myth that's fairly common, especially for gaming, is that technical competence is going to translate into success in a culturally diverse context. The scenario here is an engineer who's been very effective in the local context, and they're being asked to undertake an international assignment or lead a multiculturally diverse team. Unfortunately, technical competence does not translate to success in terms of working across cultures. Okay, time to look at the details. The cultural intelligence, or CQ, capabilities are made up of 4 different dimensions. The first is called CQ drive. CQ drive gets at our intrinsic motivation and our extrinsic motivation and confidence in dealing with culturally diverse contexts and situations. CQ knowledge measures our understanding of the cultural similarities and differences that we see and how they affect the behaviors that we observe in ourselves and others. CQ strategy is our awareness of how culture impacts us and our ability to plan and check for the assumptions that we make prior to our culturally diverse interactions. CQ action allows us to adapt our behaviors according to the cultural context, whether through an adaptation of verbal or nonverbal behaviors or communication styles. Together, these 4 capabilities define the competence of cultural intelligence. Now it's time to take a look at how those capabilities are measured and have a slight understanding of the science behind cultural intelligence. I want to be clear that today we're just having a very brief high-level look at this. Anyone who may be interested in exploring this more deeply, I would encourage you to reach out so I can provide you with more academic resources. Cultural intelligence is measured using something called the CQS, or the Cultural Intelligence Scale, devised by scientists to help us predict our CQ capabilities. It is done by using assessments which are benchmarked against worldwide norms. To date, over 150,000 of these assessments have been completed across 168 countries. The results are then aggregated into 3 different buckets. Low CQ scores are reflected in the bottom 25th percentile, and in the chart we're going to look at in a moment, we see them in a light gray band. Moderate scores reflect the mid-50 percentile. In other words, most of us see ourselves as moderate CQ. High cultural intelligence is reflected in the orange band, and that reflects the top 25th percentile. Let's take a look at an actual report now. This is a sample cultural intelligence report showing the summary page. The first thing I want to bring to your attention are the 3 bands that we just talked about for the CQS, or the Cultural Intelligence Scale. They are reflected below for each of the capabilities in the color bands for each. These reflect what we call the worldwide norms. So again, reminder that the bottom 25th percentile we see in the light gray band, the mid 50th percentile is in the dark gray, and the top 25th percentile we see reflected in orange. The next thing I want to bring to your attention is the fact that the ranges look different for each of the 4 capabilities. This is because these again are based on worldwide norms, and it might, for example, tell us that since most people consider their cultural intelligence drive to be relatively high, we see a more modest band up at the top end of the scale for the high scores. The next thing I want to bring to your attention are the absolute scores that are listed for each capability. This represents the actual self-assessment in this sample report. For example, if we look at the first dimension, CQ drive, and we see the number 75, that reflects somebody whose score is in the middle of the moderate range from the worldwide norms. So this is a pretty average CQ score. If, on the other hand, we look at the next number, 69 for CQ knowledge, we note that it's almost at the top end of the moderate score, pushing up into the high percentile. This tells us that we need to be less concerned with the absolute number we're seeing on this report and be more concerned with where the number lies within the range of the worldwide norms. Another example of how we can read this report would be the relationship between two capabilities. Here we see the circle around CQ knowledge with an absolute score of 69, and the capability is showing as almost into the top 25th percentile. Conversely, CQ strategy at 61 is almost in the bottom 25th percentile. We can also infer, in addition to these absolute number relationships, that this person may be underutilizing their CQ knowledge in relation to their ability to apply it from a strategic perspective. Once we look at the detailed report, we might better understand whether one of the sub-capabilities of awareness, planning, or checking was more the culprit. This report forms the basis of how we understand and measure cultural intelligence and becomes highly useful in building our development plans. So we now understand how cultural intelligence is defined, we understand that it can be measured, and we understand it helps us relate to others different from ourselves. However, doing this requires that we seek to understand our similarities and differences. And one of the ways we do this is by looking at our personal value preferences, or what's called our cultural values. As we further explore the concept of working effectively with others that are culturally different than ourselves, it's time to explore cultural values. Cultural values represent our preferred way of working and relating to others. They run deep within us. They are built up over a lifetime of experiences, and they form all of the assumptions and views we have of the world. Imagine you're a fish in a bowl. You're swimming around, and your view of the room is distorted by the water and the bowl that you're in. Suddenly you're scooped into a new, larger bowl. You panic, you can't breathe. After a moment, you calm down and realize this is just fresh water. Put simply, the fish's view is distorted by the environment that it's in. Similarly, cultural values and the culture that we're in distort our view of the world and the people around us. We're never going to remove the water in the bowl for the fish, nor are we going to remove our cultural values. They are who they are, but by understanding more about ourselves and our values, we can more effectively deal with the culturally diverse situations we may find ourselves in. As we seek to explore cultural values, we can look to using cultural value profiles to do this. There are a variety of tools and assessments in the market that are available, most of which help us reflect on the practical implications of behaviors stemming from cultural differences. So in other words, these profiles help us better understand our general perspective on life that can come up when we're working with different cultures. They are not intended to actually predict our cultural intelligence. Context is about our preferred way of sharing and receiving information. If we are low context, we prefer a direct form of communication. Our culture says things like say what you mean and mean what you say. In a high context culture, a less direct or a very indirect form of communication is more typical. Focus is on saving face and harmony, and much more attention needs to be paid to what is not being said and body language. When we complete a cultural value profile, we start to understand our CV orientation. In the example below, we see the pink arrow pointing to low context. So if I have a low orientation, my profile might show an arrow here on the report. I might have a peer whose report shows that they are high context or an indirect communicator. The question for us becomes, how do we deal with that difference? How is it showing up in the way we communicate and collaborate? What are the potential for miscues that we might experience as a result of that difference? So what can that mean? If I'm a high context person and I'm working with somebody who's low context, I should be focusing on sharing information in an explicit and direct way and focus on getting my message across clearly and explicitly. Conversely, if I'm working with somebody who's high context or indirect, I want to recognize the importance of silence and reflection, pay careful attention to what's not being said and body language, and remember the importance of relationships. That having been said, we learned from Erin Meyer, who's an international business professor and cultural expert, that multicultural teams need low context processes. She explains this in her book, The Culture Map, and helps us understand that because multicultural teams have many opportunity for miscues in how they share and receive information, we should coach them to default to low context processes to avoid these misunderstandings. You likely follow many of these low context processes already, but let's take a closer look. We want to ensure that agendas are sent before meetings, not only because we want to check for understanding on what will be covered, but also be clear on what a successful outcome will look like for that meeting. Meeting minutes are shared not only to ensure that individuals who didn't attend the meeting know what was covered, but it allows us to ensure we walked away with a common understanding of any conclusions. Action boards and daily scrums can help us better reflect on the status of our project. Defining decision-making processes helps our team reduce noise around who should make decisions when and why. Establishing reporting processes. How do we report to when? What does complete mean? Ultimately, at the end of the day, these low context processes are meant to define what good looks like and remove as many assumptions as possible for your diverse teams. What assumptions do we make in daily interactions with others? Which biases show up and what is their possible impact? How does culture come into the equation? How much do we attribute behaviors different to our own to cultural preferences versus personality differences? For example, if I'm low context and I don't get the information that I expect from somebody that is high context, what should be my assumptions? Do I think they're hiding information from me, for example, or that they have nothing relevant to share? If you see a colleague nod in a meeting, what would you assume that nod meant? If you then later overheard them disagreeing with the comments you made in the meeting, what assumptions could you bring then? High CQ requires that we suspend judgment before reacting, but can we always? I want to take a moment to try a short test. Imagine you're in a boat with your mother, your spouse, and your child, and the boat starts to sink. You're only able to save one of them. Who will you save? Will you save your mother, your spouse or partner, or will you save your child? How certain did you feel in your response? When I did this test as part of my certification process, I practically ran to the spot in the room that represented my answer because it just felt right to me. And despite the fact that I consider myself relatively culturally aware and high CQ, I really did assume most people would join me in that corner of the room. What do you think really happened? The results from at least one related survey provided these outcomes and factually mirrored what I saw in my own workshop. Did these results surprise you at all? I was, at least at first. At the time, the facilitator asked some of us to offer explanations for our responses. Someone then explained to us, if Mom were here, she would say, you can have more children, you can marry again, but you will only have one mother. For me, it was a strong reminder that we cannot take our values and assumptions for granted. What's familiar and accepted to us as a basic value, of course I should save my child, might not be true for a colleague from another cultural background. We've now had an opportunity to understand what is cultural intelligence, what's the relevance to the business of making games, how is it measured, and how do cultural values come into the conversation. Let's talk about how we pull that all together in terms of how we develop our CQ. How do we take actions, and what can we do to help ourselves and our teams move forward? Let's now do a recap of the 4 CQ capabilities, and as we do so, reflect on which of these capabilities you'd like to develop in yourself or your teams. So CQ Drive is measuring our ability to gain enjoyment from culturally diverse experiences and our understanding of how we'll benefit from them. It also measures our confidence in those experiences. CQ Knowledge is measuring how we understand cultures are similar and different, and how those similarities and differences affect the way people think and behave. With CQ Strategy, we begin to understand and be aware of how to plan for multicultural interactions. And in CQ Action, we're able to flex our behavior, both verbal and nonverbal, to behave appropriately in different cultural situations. I think you're going to find this chart very interesting. It comes to us courtesy of the Cultural Intelligence Center and helps us understand that not all cultural intelligence capabilities are created equal. Performance outcome is based on the role that we have in the organization or our current needs. As an example, if we look in the far left column for cultural adaptation, you'll note that the only cultural intelligence capability that's ticked off is CQ Drive. This would represent the role of an expat or a member of a culturally diverse team, and the most important capability for that individual to have is CQ Drive. If, on the other hand, we are accountable for cultural decision making, in other words, we're going to make a decision on which markets to collaborate with or build new products in, then CQ Knowledge and CQ Strategy become much more critical skills. Our CQ Drive is not quite as relevant anymore because it's not about actually working with those different cultures, but understanding how they work. Similarly, if our role is cultural negotiation, such as a business development person or a lawyer, then our ability to have strong motivation to seek out culturally diverse experiences and to act appropriately under different circumstances are the two most important capabilities for us to develop. In the fourth column, leading a multicultural team, probably many of you can see yourself there if you're a producer or a director on a game team. In this case, CQ Knowledge, you'll notice, is not ticked off, and the reason for that is that it's less critical to know specifics around how cultures are similar and different, and more important on strategizing on how you can help your own team be effective. Expanding into new markets, such as your VP might do when building out a new product or deciding to bring a product to a new area of the world, requires that we have effective skills in all 4 of our capabilities. We've covered a lot, so now let's reflect on specific strategies we can use to develop CQ in ourselves and our teams. CQ Drive. To improve CQ Drive, consider making a list of all the benefits that you gain and your team gains from having culturally diverse teams and from being high CQ. Build a presentation and show your team that so they can understand the ROI of building CQ. CQ Knowledge. Reflect on how cultural values are showing up in your leadership style. Look at the needs of your team and try to understand how you might need to flex your style accordingly. Strategy. CQ Strategy and Awareness. By adding an empty chair to a meeting, we can ensure that we reflect a missing perspective. As an example, if we're the local team and our remote team is unable to attend, we can ask that the empty chair represent their perspective in the conversation. CQ Action is about getting out of our comfort zone. By practicing non-typical behaviors, we can improve our CQ Action. An example for me would be using a quieter demeanor when I speak and perhaps less body language. Let's take a look at how we can remove some of that noise and conflict by applying cultural intelligence best practices. So first of all, let's reflect on feedback. Whether the feedback is constructive criticism or praise, We should be thinking about what is the preferred cultural preference for the individuals we're working with. Do they prefer direct or indirect feedback? Should the feedback be provided in public or in private? Should I direct my feedback to the team as a whole or just to the individual when I'm praising somebody? All of these things have cultural consequences. When we're thinking about how we assign work, cultural intelligence comes into play in terms of thinking about, are individuals more competitive or cooperative in their cultural preferences? Do they like to see more individual or group goals? An example here would be when I was working on the FIFA Street project with the team in Russia. The team in Vancouver thrived on individual goal setting for bug fixing targets and so on. However, the team in Russia worked much more effectively when we set group targets, and they worked on them together to achieve them over a period of time. This was because their culture is more collective in nature. When it comes to assessing performance or defining what good looks like, again, we should be considering cultural preferences and also going back to that recommendation of being as explicit as possible. In other words, defaulting to low context. Define exactly what's going to be measured, how it will be measured, how it will be reported, and so on. Help your team understand how their performance will be measured and how the project's performance will be measured. When you're reflecting on how information is shared, again, consider what cultural preferences might come into play. As an example, think about who's providing the feedback and how and when they're sharing information. I learned as an example that in Romania, big news should never be delivered in writing, and that due to a preference for hierarchy, big news should also be delivered by a big boss. So often we would fly in one of the senior leaders to the studio to deliver big news in person, and then we would follow it up in writing. Let's also take a quick look at some of the learning paths that are available to you to develop cultural intelligence. If we start at measuring cultural intelligence, we have the opportunity to do formalized assessments that are either self-based or 360. We can do audits that are organizational audits where we can assess the collective CQ of an organization or a team. We can do the act of self-reflection by understanding our CQ skills and how CQ is defined. We can self-reflect and understand perhaps where our own opportunities for improvement lie. By utilizing the opportunity to run events and workshops, we can spread the word and help train in cultural intelligence. We might utilize a leadership top-down approach. As an example, I recently ran a workshop for the CTO and his VPs of an IT organization within a larger company. You might do a team-based training. For example, the Central Art team at King did cultural intelligence workshop across Barcelona and London teams. And you might take a bottom-up approach. As an example here, I heard about a case study where Bell chose to train their Filipino call center staff after they rolled out a new, after they'd offshored the services and had some initial early poor feedback from customers. That resulted in a significant uptake in improved customer feedback, and they saw a definite ROI with that approach. You might choose to do online and/or self-directed training. In that case, you have definitely a variety of e-learn opportunities, both free and paid. You can use a blended option. You might use some personalized coaching and online courses to direct your own professional development in this area. Train the trainer is also an option. As I mentioned, I have been certified in cultural intelligence. By doing train the trainer, we can create running workshops as an example. We create CQ champions within the organization. We can take a further step in certifying individuals to train the cultural intelligence model, which is what I have. As you seek to explore opportunities to develop your cultural intelligence, I'd like to share a few resources. For measuring and developing your cultural intelligence, start with the Cultural Intelligence Center. This is where I was certified. They offer a variety of assessments, workshops, certifications, and online resources, both free as well as product-based. You can also look up details regarding each of the cultural values that we had in the list that I shared. For developing your cultural intelligence knowledge, please also consider exploring Hofstede's Intercultural Dimensions Framework. I provided a link to a site where you can compare 2 different countries and understand similarities and differences at a high level and provide yourself with a sophisticated stereotype to build your knowledge. Erin Meyer's book, The Culture Map, is fantastic. I mentioned this previously. She's an intercultural expert and a professor at a business school in Europe. Her work in the book demonstrates the practical examples of applying cultural intelligence in action. They're effectively mini case studies, and this link that I've provided also allows you to do a free assessment using her 8-scaled culture map. Thank you very much for taking the time to join me and learn more about cultural intelligence for the games industry. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out through LinkedIn, email, or even phone. Thank you, be safe, and be well.